Something is happening inside Iran right now that is not making enough headlines. Senior IRGC commanders are quietly moving billions of dollars out of the country, and the paper trail left behind tells you exactly what they think is coming next. Let's start with the money, because that is where the real story is. Transactions between the IRGC and Russia have reached approximately $4 billion. But here is the part that got buried in the financial reporting. A significant chunk of that money, around $700 million by some accounts, never actually reached the IRGC as an organization. It went sideways into the personal accounts of specific senior commanders who are already under heavy international sanctions. So how do you move that kind of money when your own name is on every watch list in the Western financial system? You use your wife's name. One commander's wife, who reportedly cannot read or write in any language other than her mother tongue, has her name on a hotel purchase contract in Uzbekistan, 2 apartments in a luxury Moscow complex, and a villa in Turkey. On paper, none of it belongs to anyone the US Treasury has ever sanctioned. In practice, all of it belongs to someone who needs to be somewhere other than Iran if everything falls apart, and who needs assets that can actually be accessed when that day comes. This is not speculation. The US Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network issued a formal alert on May 11, 2026, laying out in detail exactly how the IRGC moves and launders its money. Shadow fleets of old, poorly maintained vessels are smuggling Iranian oil through international waters with forged documents that relabel the cargo as Malaysian or Emirati crude. Proceeds get laundered through networks of shell companies and exchange houses spread across multiple jurisdictions. OFAC separately designated 2 UK-registered crypto exchanges, Zedkex and Zion, for processing transactions on behalf of IRGC-linked entities. Zedkex alone had reportedly processed over $94 billion in transactions since August 2022. And Treasury Secretary Bessent used a phrase that captures the mood perfectly when he announced those designations. Like rats on a sinking ship, the regime is frantically wiring funds stolen from Iranian families. The key word there is frantically, because the pace of all of this has accelerated sharply since the start of the war. Mid-ranking IRGC officers have been defecting in growing numbers since early 2026, crossing into Turkey and Azerbaijan, and what they are describing to regional media and human rights investigators paints a picture of an organization cracking from the inside. The recurring theme in their accounts is the widening gap between what senior commanders are telling the rank and file and what those same commanders are doing with the organization's money. Officers who are being asked to fight and die in the Strait of Hormuz are watching their superiors quietly park assets in Russia and Turkey, and word travels. To understand why these commanders are behaving like people who know the game is almost up, you have to understand what happened to Iran's military command structure on February 28, 2026, when Operation Roaring Lion and Operation Epic Fury launched simultaneously. In the opening wave of strikes, the Israeli Air Force killed 40 senior Iranian commanders in roughly 60 seconds. The chief of staff of Iran's entire armed forces was killed. The defense minister was killed. The head of the IRGC ground forces was killed. The commander of Iran's military emergency headquarters was killed. Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader who had run Iran for 35 years, was killed along with his daughter, son-in-law, and grandson. Over 200 Israeli aircraft struck 500 targets in the opening waves alone, and the IDF said it had dropped 200 bombs on Iranian targets in the first 2 days of fighting. Israel then killed Iran's replacement war chief 4 days into his new role. 4 days! He had just been promoted to fill the vacuum left by the previous commander's death, and Israel found him and killed him anyway. The IDF spokesperson said at the time that they were prepared and ready to continue eliminating the heads of the Iranian regime one by one, and so far that statement has held. What happened to the surviving senior commanders is the part the official briefings glossed over. After Israel struck Iran's main military emergency headquarters, the IDF stated that the remaining members of Iran's military leadership fled. That is the word the Israeli military used in its own public statement, fled. The people who were supposed to coordinate Iran's national defense in its most critical moment scattered and went dark, abandoning known positions and going off the communication channels that Mossad might have been tracking. For days, Iran's surviving command structure was invisible, and Israel was actively hunting whatever was left of it. That experience changes a person's calculus. When your colleagues are being killed 4 days into their new roles, when your own command center gets struck and your instinct is to evacuate rather than counterattack, when the ceasefire keeps threatening to collapse while negotiations produce nothing, you stop thinking about winning and start thinking about surviving. And the specific form that survival preparation takes, moving money into Russia, buying property in Turkey, registering hotel contracts in Uzbekistan in your wife's name, tells you where these commanders think the regime is heading. The Assad comparison is the one that keeps coming up among analysts, and it is apt. When Assad's position became truly unsustainable in late 2024, Russia extracted him in hours. He was in Moscow before most of the world had processed that Damascus had fallen. The people around him who had spent years quietly moving money outside Syria were in much better positions than those who had not. Every senior Iranian official watching that footage drew the obvious conclusion, and the ones who are currently registering Moscow apartments in their wives' names are acting on it. The most likely destination for the most senior IRGC figures is Russia, according to analysts who study the organization. Parliament Speaker Golubov is specifically named as someone who might head to Moscow. Lower-ranking figures would more likely go to Iraq or Afghanistan, where the IRGC has deep operational networks and relationships built over decades. The escape routes are already mapped, the assets are already moving. The question is whether the trigger for the actual exodus comes from a ceasefire collapse, a military resumption, or something slower and less dramatic, like a gradual implosion of the regime's ability to function while the ceasefire holds nominally and the money keeps flowing out. On top of the personal asset transfers, the IRGC's institutional financial operations have become increasingly desperate and increasingly exposed. OFAC designated 12 individuals and entities for enabling the IRGC's oil sales to China, describing a system where the IRGC uses its allotment of Iranian crude as a revenue source, routes the sales through front companies in permissive jurisdictions like the UAE and Turkey, receives payment outside Iran through accounts that never touch the Iranian banking system, and launders the proceeds through shell companies before any of it can be frozen or seized. One specific network involved a Syria-based company called Al-Qatirji as a primary IRGC partner, with crypto facilitators coordinating $100 million plus payments through front companies spread across multiple countries. And separately, a man named Babak Morteza Zanjani, who had previously been sentenced to death in Iran itself for embezzling billions from the national oil company, was freed from prison specifically to launder money for the regime. When you are releasing your own convicted billion-dollar fraudster from prison because you need his money-moving skills, you are not operating from a position of strength. The new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, has not appeared publicly since taking power following his father's death. An Iranian parliament member confirmed on record that he was injured in the opening strikes, that his wife was killed, that he was knocked off his feet by a blast while on a staircase in a building that was struck, and that he is recovering from knee and back injuries. The official line is that he is in full health and will address the nation when the time is right, but every other senior Iranian official has been traveling publicly during the ceasefire. The foreign minister went to Russia, to Pakistan, to Oman. The parliament speaker gave press conferences. IRGC commanders appeared on state television. The only person who has not been seen publicly is the supreme leader himself, and in a country where the supreme leader's visibility is a direct signal of regime stability, his continued absence communicates something that no official statement can quite conceal. Iran is simultaneously dealing with annual inflation that hit 65.8% by April, food inflation running even higher, a currency that has crashed to record lows, a blockade that the US says is costing the country $500 million a day, and a ceasefire that Trump described publicly as on life support. Against that backdrop, the IRGC's financial networks are trying to do two things at once: keep enough money flowing into the organization to sustain military operations and pay the people doing the fighting, while diverting another stream of that same money into personal accounts and overseas property portfolios that the commanders themselves can access if they need to leave in a hurry. The tension between those two objectives is exactly what mid-ranking defectors are describing when they talk about internal distrust and the widening gap between senior and junior officers. When the people at the top are sending one message publicly, which is that the regime will prevail and the IRGC will fight to the last, while simultaneously registering hotel contracts in Uzbekistan in their wives' names, the people a few ranks below them start to notice the disconnect. And when they notice it, some of them start making their own calculations about where this is heading and whether they want to be inside Iran when it gets there. Treasury Secretary Besant's phrase, like rats on a sinking ship, was intended as a condemnation, but it also functions as an analysis. Rats leave sinking ships because they can sense what is happening before the ship has technically gone under. The IRGC commanders moving assets out of Iran right now are doing the same thing. They are not announcing that the regime is finished. They are not publicly acknowledging that the ceasefire might collapse and the strikes might resume and the end might come faster than anyone is admitting. They are just quietly making sure that when and if that happens, they will not be trapped on the ship when it goes down. The money is already in Moscow. The properties are already in Turkey. The hotel in Uzbekistan is already registered. Whatever the ceasefire produces over the next few weeks, whether it turns into a deal or collapses into renewed strikes, the people who know most about the Islamic Republic's actual military and financial condition have already voted with their assets. And they voted the way people vote when they do not believe the story they are telling everyone else.